Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Found in Interpretation Podcast. Once again, I'm one of your co-hosts, Alain Breton, and I'm here with Brian. Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great this morning. Thanks for asking. It's been an interesting one. I'll spare you the details.
Well, we got about an hour here. And we're also here with Dr. Jonathan Downie. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a nice afternoon. I had my nice 5K run this morning. I'm in good form.
All right, then let's kick it. All right, so now we'll start with Dr. Jonathan Downie's bio. He's a consultant, conference and church interpreter, French and English. He's also a researcher, a podcaster, and an author. And he runs not one, but two YouTube channels, Inside Interpreting and Multilingual Church. And he's the co-host of the Church Interpreting Podcast. And he has written two books, three traditionally published books. So I guess these are physical books, and one ebook, and there's maybe a second one coming.
There is a second ebook coming. It's called Dr. Downie and Mr. Stick's Guide to the Future of Interpreting. Should be out very soon. I just have some technical stuff to do. The initial feedback from the beta readers was good, so I'm going to be launching it soon. And that's basically me. My second book was called Interpreters versus Machines. Can interpreters survive in an AI-dominated world? And so Dr. Downie and Mr. Stick is just me taking that book, doing a whole new update, taking it from a fresh perspective and sizing down the debate into something a lot smaller and a lot more manageable that you can read on a flight to an assignment and hopefully laugh and giggle and get you thinking.
How long ago was the AI one? Because it seems like a pretty hot topic now. So was it written a long time ago, or
it came out in 2019? So I wrote it in 2018. It came out in 2019. The lag between writing a book and it coming out is something that I wasn't prepared for.
Okay.
It kind of feels like it came out about 4 or 5 years too early.
Yeah.
But that came out in 2019, and I was in a conference in Slovakia about 2 years ago, and one of the hosts of the conference came up to me and said, so how does it feel to be a prophet? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, because everything you said would happen in the book has happened. And I was like, yes, including the stuff I was hoping wouldn't happen.
Oh, man.
So I actually give 4 possible futures in that book, whereas in Dr. Downie and Mr. Stick, I changed tackle it a bit, because with Interpreters versus Machines, I had to go into the deep things of how does interpreting work? How does machine interpreting work and all this? With Dr. Downie and Mr. Stick, I can assume that everyone knows, here's stuff that exists, right? What we're going to do about it.
So do you have a chapter that's called Told You So?
Well, the kind of funny thing is that I do have a chapter in Dr. Downie and Mr. Stick where I quote one of the world's experts on automated speech translation, which is its proper name, who says something which I'm like, yeah, of course, because he's like, none of the systems. He says none of the systems are currently as good as humans, and for the foreseeable future that will stay the same. And I'm like, yes, because the problems
that the client notice. What will the client notice?
Some have noticed. So there have been at least 3 cases that I've seen where clients have gone, we need to go back to humans. In fact, there was one of my colleagues recently put on LinkedIn that she got an emergency call from a client. He got an emergency call from a client. We've tried using these machines. The meeting's going to pop. Can you come and rescue the second day?
Oh, my God.
Wow. And then she charged double.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it charged double.
Name your price, yes.
On the market that he's in, I mean, yeah, I got a shock to the disparity in different markets, but never mind. But the problem is that for information-heavy meetings, so where it's just like, we're briefing you on the latest such and such, automated speech translation can kind of do okay if you've built the system to work properly for that meeting. Anything where you need emotions, where you need to check comprehension, where you need to be in key with the actual situation, it's going to fall apart. And it's going to fall apart for the reasons I wrote in 2019, for the reasons that people wrote in 2018, and for the same reasons that people are talking about today. The systems aren't built for that. And they're built for, you hear something, you transcribe it, you machine translate that, you send it to speech synthesis. It's called the cascade model. in interpreting research, we call it the conduit model. I had the video out 3 weeks ago that showed that we've known since the 90s that that cannot work and it does not work. And we've known that since 1989.
Have you seen last week Google released a bunch of products regarding AI and Gemini? And
Some of them,
inside
yes.
Google Meet, they are supposed to do, they call it live translation, but it's basically interpretation.
Yes.
I know it's a demo. I know it's more like a way to, create some hype around their product. And I'm not sure if it really works in real life. And sometimes it just crashes and burns. But it's, from what I've seen, it was quite impressive this time. Aren't you the bit concerned, or maybe they're using a different path that you did not expect before?
If they're using the path that they were, because they've been working on a technology called Translatotron for as long, which came out as I was writing that book. They've been working on that for a while.
Translatotron.
So Translatotron is what you call an end-to-end model, where rather
Sounds
than
like
going
the 80s with Transformers.
Yeah,
It
it's
is-
like a
so
the best
Translatotron
Optimus
doesn't.
Prime is Nemesis.
Translatotron. Translatotron.
Well,
Assemble.
The weird thing is, have you ever to explain why I'm worried and not worried is a good way of putting it. I asked all the major AI models some questions to do with stuff that I happen to be a specialist in, and asked them some specialized interpreting questions. If you ask, how many interpreters should you have for such and such an event, gives you a reasonable answer. When I ask it questions about my specialism, about stuff that I'm, top 10 in the world at, I start to see flaws, and really nasty flaws. In fact, this year alone, I have reviewed 4 academic papers and rejected 3 of them because I could spot AI in them.
Okay.
So people are using this stuff. And the problem is that when you don't know what to expect, or when you have little experience, it looks super convincing. So if I ask it about engineering or chemistry, stuff I don't know, I'll look at the answer and go, that's great. But when something happens where you need an expert to be there, for example, I tested Microsoft's Microsoft Translator at a Christian event about a year and a half ago. And this guy was talking about, it was an event on multi-ethnic church. And the preacher was talking about this restaurant in his town that serves food from like 6 different countries. So he said in English, I don't know what on earth they sold there. The French said, I don't know what devil they sold there, which is not what you want to say in a church.
Yeah, you don't want to mention the devil in church.
So you have, so there are systems that will give you for anything that is good enough. So there are some clients who just do a thing because they have to. Those clients are going to use machines. So so in my PhD, I pointed out that there's 3 different approaches that clients have to interpreting. Incidental interpreting, which is we need this, but we don't value it. Those clients are the ones who are heading for machines because they just need the thing there. Then you have clients who don't really need it physically, but they value it maybe for political reasons or for symbolic reasons. So I did a job at the Scottish Parliament where we had 16 interpreters there and no one picked up a headset the entire 3 days. But having it there was important because it's the International Summit on blah, blah. And if you're international, you've got to have interpreters.
Yeah. And if there aren't any, then you're going to hear about it.
Exactly. And so for those clients, having us there is
like a peace of mind.
It's the tokenism. Even people who are racist know there's certain stuff that they have to do to get stuff through. And so even clients who don't care about languages sometimes know it's politically right to have an interpreter here.
This escalated quickly.
Yeah, but then you have, and these clients are, when you find them, the final clients are the integral interpreting clients, where the clients come up to you at the end and go, we couldn't have done it without you. Those clients tend not to want to move to machines because they've experienced something in interpreting that they realize goes beyond, I got the information the other speaker was saying.
Which is?
So for example, in church, it could be that they've noticed that the interpreters partnered with them and were able to get over something of the message that wasn't just in the words. So, the emotion, the the connection to it, or it could be I had one
The
client.
Holy Spirit that is not in the machine.
Exactly. Or the classic one, I was interpreting, and I have to be careful because this client got on TV because the contract I interpreted, I was interpreting for a client in the UK, and it was a kind of 2-day sales qualification meeting where the buyer's coming into their company to check they're doing everything as they should do. You know, are there any slaves here? Are all the machines up to spec? Are your people happy and stuff? You know, are you keeping all the laws? And about 3/4 of the way through what was a fairly friendly, chatty meeting, because everyone really expected it would get signed off. 3/4 of the way through the meeting, they start arguing with each other. The French guy is arguing with these British people because they seem to be evasive and they're not answering his questions. And he's getting really annoyed. The British company are getting really annoyed because the French guy keeps asking the same question again and they're giving him the same answer. What will it take to please this dude? So eventually they get out of the negotiating room, they walk down the hall where they're poking at charts on the walls. You know, we got to the poking at things with your finger part of the meeting. And I suddenly have this realization that the French guy is saying qualité and using it to mean the percentage of pieces that come out the factory and never need returned.
I see.
The British company is using quality to mean the percentage of pieces that have to be returned because they've got a flaw in them. So when the British company say, yeah, our quality is really high, it's 3%.
The French guy's like,
And so
"Ugh."
I go, right, hold on. What's going on here? Right. So I can't remember what I exactly said, but I paused the meeting and said in both French and English, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Explained to the two sides. Suddenly everyone nods. They go back to the negotiating room, pull up some Excel sheet, and within an hour the contract was signed.
Huh.
To make it even better, the British CEO came up to me at the end, said we couldn't have done it without you. I'm like, I'm glad I was here. Then dropped a bomb on me by saying, you don't realise this, but I'm a French speaker. He said, I understood everything the French guy was saying, I just didn't know what it meant. He said, your interpreting helped me see what it meant. So he couldn't spot it, despite the fact he's a bilingual, because he's not trained. I mean, if you're not an interpreter, you're not trained to deeply analyze text. Those clients who go, this is different, they stay. And it's we're so trained as interpreters into this invisible thing, this I'll sit back thing, I'm not going to make a scene thing, that we are, without meaning to, doing ourselves out of a job because if we want to be invisible, if we want to be impartial, if we want to not make a difference, that's what Google does. That's what machine translation does, machine interpreting does. So we have a choice. Which clients are we going to chase? I know some colleagues who love the symbolic clients because whether someone listens or not is immaterial to them. And it looks good for an interpreter to say, you know, I've got this summit on my CV. I know other colleagues who would much rather be there with the clients at the factory, in the hospital, in the lawyer's meeting, so obviously involved in the event that no one's going to question, was there an interpreter there?
Yeah.
But we got to choose.
Yeah, I know. Like even like my mom, she was a medical interpreter for years, and yeah, when she retired, I think it was last year, maybe a year and a half ago, and all the doctors like, oh no, I can't believe we're losing you. Like like she had that relationship with the doctor and with the patient, and like you could tell there was like an interpreter there. Like a machine wouldn't have been able to convey the message, like, you know, like you've got 6 months to live, or you're gonna have a boy or a girl, like, you know. She was there for those moments, and yeah, you can feel that attachment, and yeah, I think she was going to be missed in that community because of that. Now, how do you go from like AI and all this stuff to church interpreting? That's what I want to know.
Well, the churches are exploring that at the moment, so I had to write my book, Multilingual Church, to help them explore it wisely. But my first interpreting experience was in church.
Okay.
I was about my first experience, I had never seen an interpreter. My father spoke German, French, English, and was fluent in Hebrew and Greek from the Bible. My mum learned a language because she worked in a children's home for a while. So she learned another language. I grew up with an open house. So we would have people from all around the world and all sorts of states in our house growing up. But then at the age of 15, I go to this Christian youth conference in Germany. And I'm enjoying being away from home and stuff. And I look up, and on the stage, there's a guy standing in the middle and two women standing either side. Because, we're three guys, but we know 70% of interpreters are female. So this guy's preaching with two women either side. And I realized that very quickly he was preaching in German. I had enough French from school to recognize one of these women was speaking French and the other one was speaking English. And he would say a sentence and the two interpreters would at the same time give their version because they were in speakers at different sides of the stage. And I looked at what amazed me wasn't just the language skills, but it was the fact that what these interpreters were saying was having an emotional effect on the people listening. He would tell a story and these interpreters would retell it and I would go, what's happening is that the same emotional force is going to everyone at the same time because these people are doing that job. And I decided then that's what I want to do. Roll forward a couple of years later, I interpreted someone's story on the streets of Brighton in the south of England during another youth conference. Then I do my year abroad as part of my undergraduate degree in the far north of France in Dunkirk. And someone taps me on the shoulder 3 days before the European Youth Conference and says, do you want to interpret at the youth conference? I was like, sure. Oh, we better give you a trial first. The night before the youth conference is due to start, I get a trial at the church youth group. Yeah, you're good enough. You've got the gift. And that was it. I did all the French to English. I still have the picture over there. I did all the French to English on my own on stage for this European Youth Conference. And that was it. I was hooked. And then I did my master's at Heriot Watt in Edinburgh. And the weird thing was going from church interpreting, which is they expect you to be physically involved in a lot of churches. That youth conference, the first time I interpreted, they were giving out a prize for the first person on stage. I was between the person and the speaker, so I go flying backwards. While still holding the mic, of course. I'm a professional. But I go from that to, right, let's train you so that you can do the EU exam. And I was like, nothing in my interpreting practice prepared me for policy development in the European Union. And I'm like, this is not the world that I trained in. Like to go from, people laughing and crying and shouting, and then it's like, and on the 15th of July, 1977, we concluded the convention. And it's like, what on earth? So I kind of feel like I'm two interpreters in one person. So like, last week, was it last week? Yeah, last week I was doing assignments on a prize giving for a company who makes some personal products and international mining regulations. And then on Sunday, and then it was 2 weeks ago, I was like some personal products, international mining regulations. And on Sunday, I was doing a church service on finances. I'm like, my interpreting assignments could not get more different right now.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's like, okay. And I tell people that church interpreting teaches you flexibility because I have had weeks where 1 week we're doing a sermon based on a film, The Great Showman, a film on to do with the circus. And the next week we're doing a sermon on getting rid of pornography addiction. You learn to be flexible.
Yeah, I bet. Have you interpreted for the Pope yet?
No, see, I'm in the Protestant charismatic tradition.
Ah, the Protestant.
But it would be interesting to interpret for the Pope.
Yeah.
I must admit, I tell people that my job is keeping English speakers out of trouble.
Uh-huh.
Because anyone who's interpreted for... See, Canadian people tend not to get into trouble that much. But Brits, Americans, and South Africans... British, American, and South African preachers are known for saying stuff. I mean, a lot of them are fine, but you get the odd one and you go, okay, that works great in your culture.
Can you give an example?
British speakers are known for doing like hyper-localized illustrations in their talks. And I'm like, I'm going to have to explain what the old firm are now. Every conference in Edinburgh ends with a Cayley, and I'm like, I'm going to have to say what a Cayley is in French for the 90th time, no problem.
Wow.
So
So
how did you?
I've done church services before, and I found like the most useful thing is to get the Bible readings ahead of time, because they are nothing alike in the two languages. Like if you try translating it, like no, forget about it.
Oh, you
You
gotta know
have
it
to
by
know.
heart.
Well, you also have to know the equivalent translation. So there are really only two translations that I see a lot in French churches. Yet one of my favorite English Bible translations is called The Message, where the guy I wrote to the translator not long before he died, and I said it's the first Bible translation that I've seen up till that point that was his whole approach was so much like the way I was taught to translate at university. And
Which
I'm like,
is?
it's called The Message, and what he did was, if you've done any translation theory, the guy looked at his church and went, I'm going to write a translation brief first before I start translating the Bible. And I'm translating it for these people in this church who have this issue. And I'm like,
Okay.
that sounds like I did translation for 4 years before I realized that I talk too much and I
He
like
wasn't
people too much
translating
to be
the
a
whole
translator.
Bible. He was translating segments that were
The
specific.
whole thing. The
whole
whole
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
He did the New Testament first, then he did the Old Testament.
The OG of localization, right there.
The guy was his name was Eugene Peterson. He was a theologian, a pastor, and a Bible translator. Did the whole thing, and I was amazed because when you read his preface, I've gone into reading Bible translation prefaces because I've got a video coming out on Bible translation soon. And when you read his preface, it reads like a really, really good translation brief, like we would get from a client, like I used to get from good clients, rather than just, can you translate this by tomorrow? When you got the really good clients who said, this is going in such and such a magazine, which is aimed at such and such a market, we need it to follow such and such a house style. And I'm like, that makes the job easier.
Yeah.
And you read Eugene Peterson's, the preface to The Message, and you go, you know what a translation brief is. You know what attuning stuff to an audience is, and that's what you've done. And I'm like, are you sure you didn't do a master's in translation before you did this? Because it literally any of my profs could have written that preface, and I'm like, whoa, that's good. And it's just a really lovely to read translation.
But can you give me a concrete example? Because now I've read the Bible both in French, and in English, and I also read sometimes some simplified version. I read the King James version, and I went through several of these versions. But when you're talking about, you seem to be talking more about a localized version of the.
So
can you give me a more concrete example?
So let me go get it's here.
There we go.
There we go.
It's getting real now.
Always have a bookshelf next to your desk. So the theologians call it a paraphrase, and then I look at them like this, because all translation is paraphrase. But if I grab like the most well-known passage, like John 3:16, can't believe I'm reading the Bible on a podcast and it's not even mine.
Yeah.
Seriously, guys. John 3:16. So the usual John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him would never perish but would have eternal life. It doesn't even have verse numbers.
Just came into my head.
There's no verse numbers in this. So I'm going to let's see if I can find it. So he did, this is how much God loved the world. He gave his son, his one and only son, and this is why, so that no one needs to be destroyed. By believing in him, anyone can have a whole and lasting life. Wow. So he's taking... So my dad died when I was 17, and the Message New Testament came out not long before my dad died. And my dad said he's taking what's there in the Greek and what's implied in the Greek and going, well, how would English naturally imply that? Most Bible translations now, in English certainly, there's been a few new ones that have changed things a bit, but most Bible translations in English either say, how can we get as close to the original Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic wording as we can? Or they go down a slightly different route and they try to do something like The Message, but they don't go as far as that. And so I've got my Bible translation video, which I'm recording this week, is explaining how theologians talk about different types of equivalents when actually we should be talking about different audiences. And Eugene Peterson was the first one to go, I've got an audience in mind and I'm going to write in their language. Most Bible translations will say, this is for general use or this is for study. And so they're trying to meet a really wide audience. It's the difference between, if you do remote interpreting and you don't know who's going to be there. So like often I'll interpret in church, I don't know who's listening. And the people listening probably aren't even in the same place as the church. So I can't then customize my interpreting to those people. Whereas if I'm in person, if it's like my own church or if it's a church I know, my interpreting is going to sound in French like they're used to French preachers sounding, because I know how those guys sound, and I'm going to make my interpreting sound like that, because that's what I'm there to do. They shouldn't, the only time that I agree with the invisibility thing is they should see no difference between what they hear when I interpret and what they hear next Sunday when someone preaches in French.
Yeah, I feel like I have that advantage in a sense for Spanish, because I grew up in South America for about 12 years.
Yeah.
In Venezuela, Chile, Peru, and my mom's originally from Mexico. So like, there's all these different dialects and stuff, and like, you don't, this country doesn't use this word, but this country does. So you got to see who your clientele is that's listening to you to make sure you're using the right word. But even with like French from Quebec and French from France, like there's some words that don't exist in either one, or like, they don't use them. Like even just like something simple like a watermelon, like you say in Québécois.
What'd you say in Québécois?
For watermelon?
A melon d'eau.
Yeah, melon d'eau. Whereas in France, it's pastèque, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry, no. Yeah, I was thinking not watermelon. Yeah, I was thinking pomegranate, because
pomegranate. Yeah.
Because I was trying to show people why automatic speech translation doesn't work. And so the reason why I have grenade in my head is I went to Google Translate and said, où sont les grenades? Thinking, imagine you're taking this into a supermarket. And Google Translate, if you say où sont les grenades, says, where are the grenades?
I thought you were going to say that suddenly Google Translate put a warning and said this gets too violent and I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Well, the funniest one is if you say les soldats ont mangé des grenades, it says the soldiers ate the grenades.
Oh my goodness.
And it's why I say to people, this
taste is explosive. I tell you.
Well, but how many little things that come up in a dialect or I've not even tested it in the Scottish dialect where I grew up, because I know what would happen.
Will it recognize it? Just joking.
My wife is English, and whenever
I wonder the same thing about Québécois.
Yeah, or strong accents in general. Like, how does AI deal with that? Like,
it's only just now. So you get those phone lines where you have to say something down the phone.
Yeah,
I used to pass them to my wife because she's English, and get her to say the thing, and then I could take the. But there's a joke in my ebook which just came out, which is called Interpreting Wit, and it's like an interpreter's joke book. And I said, you're a Scottish interpreter, where every time you said something in class when you were training, everyone thought it was difficult accent day. And it's like, Jonathan, you can't do a speech in class until January, because in January we work on accents. And then it comes in handy because you interpret for fishermen who are from the north of Scotland, and it's like, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's.
But do you have, since you deal with an international audience, if I may digress a little bit here, but when it comes to the accent, in my case, if I had to use my regular strong Québécois accent when I do my interpretation, either the client would, it depends on who the target audience is, but some clients might actually either complain or not understand what I'm saying. So I have to level my French up to a certain standard without, trying to mimic the French from France. Quite obviously, it would just sound ridiculous. But do you have to do the same thing to get away a bit from your natural Scottish accent?
So I tell people I'm a tame Scot because my mum's English and my wife's English. But I have learned. So the last client to complain was Canadian. Go figure. Canadians complaining about anything is really weird.
Did they apologize after?
They did. They absolutely did.
They did. Oh my God.
Through the entire meeting, no one said "A," and I'm like, "What's wrong with you guys?" But so I can smooth it out if I need to. But what I found is that with some speakers, they are so quick that being from the west of Scotland helps, because the only Québécois people have managed to outpace me. I used to say to people, I'm from the west of Scotland. There is not a speaker alive who can outpace me. Then I interpreted for engineers from Quebec. And I thought, all right, you win. It's a we have debates in Europe about should interpreters get rid of their accent, where one linguistically you can do no thing. You always have an accent, even if it's supposedly the general one.
Yeah, nobody has no accent.
No one has no accent.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that we have to be careful, because increasingly in meetings, I've noticed that you're getting people from different backgrounds who are speaking in meetings. It would sound very strange if someone who's very clearly, say, from Yorkshire in the UK speaks, and the interpreter interprets them into a French that makes them sound as if they went to La Sorbonne. There would be an obvious mismatch there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially when we're talking about, equality, especially when we're talking about hearing new voices, I think maybe in interpreting, we need to understand that depending on the assignment, having an interpreter who sounds a little bit different can be an advantage. Certainly when I've done the fisheries policy, when the fishermen are from the northeast of Scotland and you have a Scottish interpreter, it just sounds right. And the French fishermen were from the north of France, so I had to be careful that my French accent didn't become too strong, because I could have quite easily mimicked them.
Yeah.
But it's, you probably wouldn't invite me to do, the British Prime Minister at the UK Parliament. But I've worked in the Scottish Parliament several times. It depends. It's okay to say it depends on what the client's looking for. I shouldn't be interpreting rap. It's just not a good idea. You also don't want me doing anything medical, because I faint at the sight of blood. So there are certain things I can go, no.
My kids say I shouldn't rap at all, so I forget about interpreting rap.
I did do an interpreting rap once, which is still on YouTube.
Sweet.
Link in the description below.
Yeah.
It's on the inside. It's one of the shorts on the Inside Interpreting channel, because interpreters know that our job is not just passing on information. And yet when we talk to clients,
the client knows as well.
It's our job to help them know.
Mm-hmm.
Very good point.
I saw your latest episode. It was one of my research heroes, Ebru Derricker. And Ebru's book, like, she's only written one book, and it was an absolute it's difficult to explain how big a deal this was in research, and how
you
big
mean the Ivory Tower? No, like
yes, the Ivory Tower book. It's difficult to explain how controversial it was when it came out.
Why? Like a literary mic drop. She's like, one and done. Here we go.
Why was that?
It was 2004. It came out. Changed my. I found it in the library, and it changed my PhD. It's not the most readable book for interpreters, but for researchers, you read it and your eyebrows just crawl further and further up your forehead. And one of the points she makes is that interpreters in public talk about accuracy, impartiality, professionalism. You get them chatting and they will talk about that time when we didn't say something because we knew people already knew it and we needed to save the space to do something else. That time we put an explanation in. That time we got a client out of trouble. That time that we strategically reordered stuff so that people would be able to understand it.
Uh-huh.
And she said, why in public are we basically robots? And yet every interpreter has that story, has at least one story of, yeah, I was interpreting and I needed to do this because, yeah, I was interpreting and I made a difference doing this because.
The constant choices we have to make.
All those, we never talk. So Inside Interpreting is my main YouTube channel. I do a lot of humor in the shorts, but also I'm trying to do more stuff there to explain interpreting is not about passing on information. My most recent video was with Cynthia Roy and Graham Turner, both of whom are amazing people to interview. And in 1989, Cynthia Roy's doing her PhD. Everyone in research is talking about, analysing interpreter errors and mistakes, and how does the interpreter's brain work, and how does information go from here to here. And she records a meeting between a deaf student, a hearing professor, and the sign language interpreter who was there in the meeting. And it's an interpreted meeting, and at one point the sign language interpreter signals to the deaf student to stop, interprets what the professor's saying, and then comes back. And she's like, seen stuff in her own practice a bit like that, but it's like, what's going on? Interviews the student and the professor afterwards, and the student said, I'm so glad the interpreter did that because I needed to hear what the professor was saying, and I wasn't going to be able to focus if I was still signing. The interpreter used their judgment to make sure that I was getting what I needed to out of this meeting. And she analysed that and wrote her PhD and wrote her first book out of it. And from 1989 on, researchers then knew interpreting is not about passing on information. And I can literally name you book after book, article after article that said that. And then my first book, which is not on the screen right now, pointed out we've not been listening. And so I wrote Being a Successful Interpreter. And the first chapter is basically going over a bunch of that research.
But are you telling me that before that, we basically, sorry to interrupt, but are you saying that before her book, people didn't realize that we're always basically prioritizing information and making some choices? That seems pretty obvious to me.
So in research until 1989, any change in the information content of what was said was read as an error. And interpreter training until the early 2000s was based on accuracy, impartiality, and not adding or omitting. In the early 2000s, especially from conference interpreting, when conference interpreting starts realizing that stuff applies to us too, now in any good interpreter training university, they will at least at some point talk about decision making. At some point, they'll talk about prioritizing information. At some point, they'll talk about managing your cognitive load. The cognitive load stuff is a lot older, but it's only like Daniel Gilles talked about balancing your cognitive load, and even he's talking about information. It's when the guys from community and the researchers from community interpreting and public service interpreting and legal interpreting showed what this looked like. And then Ibri Dereker and Shader Aslan showed what it looked like in conference interpreting. Warren Beaton talked about interpreters adjusting their output to more suit their context. Suddenly people go, oh, hold on a minute. And this is like my middle book, Interpreters versus Machines. I argued that until we are prepared to talk that way to clients can't tell the difference between us and machines without us saying to them, this is what we're doing on an average assignment. You know, a standard assignment, we're doing all of our interpreting stuff. We're watching for signs of comprehension or lack of comprehension. We're balancing the information load. We're deciding what information to prioritize. We're working out what intonation does that have to go in. Okay, they've used that term on the stage. I'm going to use that term next time that comes up. We're doing all of that.
Ibra was talking about that because she was talking about making the invisible interpreter visible. Yeah, with all of the things that you just explained.
That's how I got it from first.
But in your book, do you make a comparison on the result? Because we can talk among ourselves and say, you know what, this is what happens with our process. But ultimately, for the client, what matters is the result. So it was. Are there any comparisons out there where you're saying, you know what, the humans made that choice, it was right for this reason, and in the same situation with the same speech, the machine did that, and that's why there was an error?
There's you've hit on a very painful subject. I am not aware of any machine interpreting supplier who has ever been happy for a live, unedited human-machine comparison. I've offered it for about 4 years. No one's taken me up. I do know that there was a video from Wired with Barry Olson and another interpreter who tested the Kudo system. Videos are edited. I was impressed by some of what the Kudo system did, and I could have predicted what Barry and the other interpreter were going to say in their analysis, because once you know how the magic trick is done, you know the limits of the trick. What I found is really effective is actually storytelling. So most of the stuff in my second book, I'm telling stories. So I tell that story about, the company where quality was they were talking about the same word from different perspectives. There's some other stories in there. In Multilingual Church, I've got some stories. And if we tell stories about choice and about where the strict way that we would normally say this is this. But in this case, we knew the right thing to do was this. And we can even, we're free to test it, grab Google Translate or something and just say the sentence and see what it comes up with and go, yeah, but when I did it, I said this because. The problem is that the way that machine interpreting systems are evaluated at the moment, I have to be careful because I've got an article out on this, article coming out on this. The way that they're being evaluated at the moment is using tests that are known to be flawed.
Huh.
We've known they're flawed for a while now.
It's almost like manipulating statistics, basically.
It's not. To be fair, they're not manipulating the statistics, but it would be like, I'm trying to think of an example. It's a widely used test called the Blue test, called Blue. Blue is used, machine translation, it's used in evaluation across the board, but it's not very good. Okay. But that's what people are used to using, so they use it.
The Blue test.
Blue, BLEU.
Yeah.
To explain how Blue works, it's really simple. You get a translation that you know is good, and you get your machine translation version, because, by the way, to test most but not all machine interpreting tests are done assuming it was a translation. The intonation stuff, the test for that exists. Again, can't give too much detail. I've got an academic article that is coming out soon. But Blue takes a translation that you know is right versus a translation that you've got from the machine and compares it 1 word at a time, 2 words at a time, 3 words at a time, and just asks, how mathematically similar are they? Now, here's the thing. Mathematically, yeah. So it will give you a score that's measuring how similar is the wording of this translation to this one, and gives you a number of points based on how similar the wordings are.
Okay.
Sounds like it works until you ask the question, well, what if the new translation is aimed at a different audience than the previous one?
Because of the localization aspect.
Yes. So you do that with an interpreting system, and you even if you were to compare it to known good interpreting, so you get, some speech from the UN and you hold it back when you're training the system, and then you test it on it and you say, how similar are these two speeches? Okay, one, the same speech is rarely given twice, and we as interpreters know it's never given to the same audience twice.
Yeah.
So legitimately speaking, a UN interpreter could take a speech that's given to a plenary session and interpret it completely differently when it's being given to another kind of conference. Because the audience is different. So of course you're going to do it differently.
Yeah.
But if you're testing using Blue, you've got a lower score the second time. So there's a whole lot more which will come out in the article. And that much I can say, because that issue is known. That's a known issue.
So when is the rabbit coming out of the hat? Right now we can only see the ears coming out of the hat. So when is the rest of it coming out?
I am waiting.
Okay.
I am waiting for 2 things. For the first liability case to hit the courts.
Okay.
Because people are talking about using machine interpreting and legal interpreting and in medical interpreting. At some point, someone's going to get sued. And then they're going to read the terms and conditions and find out that most machine interpreting terms and conditions disclaim any liability. Maybe not all, but all the ones I've checked. And the second thing I'm waiting for is for a company to lose money. But on the other hand, I have to say something that I cannot honestly, intellectually say machine interpreting is useless.
Yeah, I know.
Because there are situations where it's the right thing to do. So I say in multilingual church, if your church has like no cash and you need interpreting and you don't know where to find them, it's there. Yeah. If I came across, someone was talking to me about a church where they're next to an asylum centre, where the language profile of people in their church changes every Sunday, then okay, go for machines.
Yeah. Although, like, the machine isn't that less expensive than interpreters. Like, if you think about all the stuff that you have to do in order to provide it. No.
Yeah. And so, like, there's so much with machine interpreting. There's so much going on. There's the systems are getting better depending on how you measure better. That's a whole conversation. Interpreting quality is a whole thing. When I was doing my PhD, my senior supervisor said, "Don't touch interpreting quality." Then you have, are we ready for some of our clients to take them, and for us to be able to say in certain cases, "Okay, on you go."
Uh-huh.
And the third thing is, well, how do we justify to anyone that they should still use us? Even now, how do we justify that? And the only justification that I've seen that ever works is we are better than the machines at a specific number of things that matter to you in this meeting.
But we're not good at marking ourselves as well as the machines are.
Chapter 4 in Interpreters versus Machines is called How We Messed Up Our Own PR.
There you go. You can add me as a co-author.
but I mean, it's literally, let me get it.
Here we go. We're going to pencil it in. Pencil my name in chapter 4.
There we go. You can still buy, it's going to be backwards on the screen now. You can still buy this book
No,
in
it's
chapter 3, chapter 4.
Okay.
The publisher made it quite expensive, but chapter 3, chapter 4 is how we wrecked our own PR. And this is why, so a few months ago, I launched a challenge. And I said to interpreters, look, I know you have a video camera because you have a smartphone. I know you have a sense of humor because no one lasts very long as an interpreter without a sense of humor.
True.
So grab a smartphone, think of something funny to do with interpreting. It could be like, I did a skit where it was a client saying, how come you need documents before you interpret? Don't you already know all the words? And I just did a kind of comedy skit based on that. And I was like, yeah, we know lots of words. We know all the best words. But imagine that you had to do a speech on nuclear power, and then 3 hours later you had to do a speech on manufacturing, and then 2 hours after that you had to go and do a speech on healthcare. Would you have to prepare for that? Yeah. That's what we do for a living. Oh, so scripting stuff like that, which is gentle humor.
Yeah.
And I said to interpreters, you can do this. A short is a maximum of 60 seconds. You have a camera, you have creativity, you have a sense of humor. Find something that's funny. So I did a whole thing of the real drawback of remote interpreting is whenever I used to interpret in person, it would be in these conference venues and hotels. And just before tea time, they would have to wheel away the breakfast cart with all the pastry on it. Yeah. And I became quite good at just opening the booth door and going, and I was like, when you do remote work, no one ever gives you a free pastry. So I did a whole remote interpreting setup and had an empty plate, and it's like, no pastry on that plate.
No, what happened?
But we have all these stuff that we can joke. You don't have to. I mean, you shouldn't say anything about specific clients. No one needs to know Bob so-and-so went to the hospital for such. You don't need to do that. But there are general interpreting things that we can find funny and that clients find funny. And I got an email a few months ago. I'd done that one on preparation about, why interpreters need prep. I got an email from someone saying, you did that silly short, that funny short on why do we need preparation? I was like, yes. But what you don't know is I interpret in the church, and the pastor always used to say, if you're good enough, you can do it without notes. And I sent the pastor your video, and the next week I got all the notes. And it's like, our client education was in PR have been so awful that doing something funny about, why do interpreters tell people, the one I want to do is, why do we tell people never to tap the microphone?
Oh my God, yeah.
And it's like, because there was once an assignment where the speaker went to test the microphone, whispered into the microphone, thought it was off. In the meantime, in the second between them whispering, we all turn our volumes up because we think the mic's low.
Oh my God.
Poof! Poof!
Right in your ears.
Is this thing on? So you know that you know that works.
Yeah.
And everyone's had and it doesn't matter if some of us do the same skit or some of us do a skit on similar things. We can fix our PR with a smartphone and a bit of imagination.
Yeah.
And I got the idea from a guy called Dr. Glockenfleck and Will Flannery. He's an ophthalmologist in the US and has now got like 10 million TikTok followers and so many YouTube followers because he does comedy on what it's like to be a doctor in the US. And suddenly people are going, I didn't realize this. And he's doing that and raising awareness and changing how people see stuff. And I'm like, well, we're good at language and we're kind of funny. Every interpreter I know is really funny in every way possible. Why can't we? And I keep saying to interpreters, just do the thing. Grab your camera. And so if you're listening to this podcast, grab your camera and think, what's the daftest thing that happened to me as an interpreter? And if you want to do a skit, you just record one side of the conversation, then the other, intercut it on any video software you like. There's a thing called YouTube Create that you can download, YouTube's own video editing software that goes on your phone, blah, blah, blah. And it's about half an hour all in. Find half an hour, come up with a daft idea and throw it on as a YouTube short. And you'd be amazed, one, how many people watch these things, two, the comments that you get. And you never know, one day you might get a client phone up and said, oh, I saw your short on why I shouldn't tap the mic. I've stopped tapping the mic now.
The other way people could do it is just tuning in on Found in Interpretation.
But yeah,
shameless plug right there.
but you guys are taking up. So when Troublesome Terps came out, I don't want to look when Troublesome Terps came out. It'll make me feel very old. When Troublesome Terps started a while back, we were filling the gap in that we were primarily the podcast for interpreters, and occasionally it would filter out. Well, now you guys are on YouTube. You can be the podcast for anyone around interpreting because we're good at talking to ourselves. Like I can talk to any interpreter in the world about, what's your favorite console make? What headset are you wearing? Blah, 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 blah. Clients don't care. But you start talking to people on a podcast about the daftest thing that happened to you while interpreting, the clients go, I thought you just sat in a box all day. What's this I hear about? And it's like, did a job in a nuclear power plant once. Now, I was really difficult because they said, don't touch anything. And there was a button that was flashing. and I'm a 41-year-old male. I am like hardwired that if a button is flashing, I have to poke it.
Yeah. Especially when it says press this button.
Yeah, it's in the control room of a live nuclear reactor. See, it's hard to say. All these buttons flashing, and I'm like, but
wasn't that the beginning of the series Chernobyl? Some guy pressing.
Yeah,
I think it's in every Simpsons episode too.
Have either of you ever interpreted on a factory tour?
Yeah, once. Yeah.
Is it just me? Like, you get these factory people, and some of these factories, people working in the factory are quite
big dudes. Yeah,
fitter than I am. Big guys. And I did one tour, one bit of the factory, all of the workers were in full-on head-to-toe hazmat suits, had a mask on, gloves and tape all around the suits. And we walk in there, bump cap, slightly badly fitting steel toe cap, shoes, bright yellow jackets. And I'm like, are we underdressed? And I always feel like in a factory tour, you're like... And then there's always that bit in the factory tour where someone that you're interpreting for turned around and goes, oh, you know a lot about this stuff. How long have you been in this sector for?
Yeah.
I got asked in the nuclear power plant, how long have you been working in nuclear energy for? So I pulled out my wrist, which didn't even have a watch, and went, about 2 hours.
Yeah, I had that at a steel plant too. I'm like, it's hard to breathe in the steel plant. Oh my God.
Steel plants are great. Steel plants are great, especially when they're pouring. Did you watch them pour the hot steel?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm not going near that.
Yeah, I know. Oh my God.
It is like, you see the world as an interpreter, and I sometimes think we could just do a whole thing of interpreter crazy stories of like,
absolutely.
You stand at some assignments and you're like, how did I get here? And there was one assignment, I was in the middle of, I wrote on LinkedIn recently that you're an interpreter where you get out a briefing and you go, I've never worked in this area before. I'll need to look it up. I hope it's interesting. And within about a day of researching it, you suddenly have strong opinions as to what people in that industry should be doing. And by the time you come to interpret it, you're like, I didn't realize that the economics of wood was so interesting. And then the next assignment comes in and you're like, oh, I hope it's not boring.
I'm going to open up my own, sawmill in British Columbia.
Yeah, just like how, and if you haven't had an assignment where you stood somewhere and gone, how did I get here? You haven't interpreted for very long.
That's true enough.
Like standing, like I did a wood economics summit with lumberjacks and their managers, and it was really obvious who was who. and I'm sitting like surrounded by French-speaking lumberjacks, doing whispered interpreting, going, "This is really not like I was trained for." But we need to let clients know that this is the humanity of interpreting, and like we get to the point where, you do a job, you actually get to the point of caring about the use of machine learning to help deprived areas in the world, like AI in developing countries for improving farm yields. Didn't know that was a thing until I interpreted on it, and I'm like, they need to do more machine learning.
Well, here's where I think like this is like a good sign as to when to retire. It's like when you stop caring, because like I care about every assignment, and like I like you, and like I research it. I want to know as much as possible about it, and then I'm kind of like pumped at the end of it because I'm like, oh man, I did a good job because like I use these terms and all this. I think it's when you're just like you could tell like during the delivery, but also like you're like, okay, well, on to the next assignment. Like then maybe it's time to move on to other things.
There's a line in Interpreters versus Machines where I say the biggest difference between humans and machines is that humans can cry. And there are times where human emotions are an asset.
Yeah.
And twice I've had vicarious trauma, but once when I was surprised I didn't was I was interpreting at the Scottish Parliament, and this time there were actually people listening, and it was it was a cultural thing. Artsy speakers are great because you're going to have fun. But this guy stood up. He was a film director, Palestinian theatre and film director. And he said, he said, thank you for inviting me and stuff. I'd like to entitle my speech, How I Learned to Love Israeli Soldiers. And already I'm in the booth going, I don't know where this is going. And he just tells this story of he was going to work one day in the theatre, and there was this big sound of a blast, and an Israeli soldier was nearby and pinned him to the ground, and it was pouring with rain. And the guy looks up and sees that the soldier's boots have obviously got some kind of problem with them, where he's like, I could tell his feet were getting wet. And he said suddenly realised he's a person too. And he started talking about how he wanted, and he then tried to use theatre. He said, I'm not a negotiator, I'm not this, I'm not that, but I want to use theatre to try and bring people together. He said, and this was way before the latest conflict, I want to bring peace. And I'm interpreting this guy sharing his experiences. The guy had no notes, no slides, nothing. And I'm interpreting this guy's talk, and I'm almost in tears doing it because I can feel how much it means for him to, one, have the freedom to say this, and two, be able to share his story with an audience who doesn't know that this is the world that people live in.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, you couldn't have interpreted that without the emotion. You couldn't have interpreted that without the feeling. And he got like a great reception. I was like, it was a privilege for me to be part of that because, I didn't write the speech, but I had the honor of bringing that to an audience who wouldn't have otherwise understood it. Knowing that there were people listening, like I was hanging on his every word, and I was like, I'm going to use all of my public speaking skills because I want them to do that too. And moments like that make me not just be glad that I'm an interpreter, but also make me think you can't replace an engaged human being with something on a smartphone. The smartphone doesn't care.
Yeah.
The smartphone doesn't understand that for a Palestinian film theatre and film director to even say those words is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Right. So who's going to carry the weight of saying those words for another audience? I know who I'd want. And I tell people, you know, like I've been speaking French since I was 7, 8 years old. But if I had to go to a doctor in France, I'd want an interpreter there because I want someone to carry the weight with me. And maybe we should call ourselves weight carriers rather than interpreters, because sometimes we got to carry a bit of weight, and that's why we're here.
Absolutely. And on that note, I feel like we're going to get kicked out of YouTube because the description at the end of this is going to be like all of these references to all these literary works and videos and podcasts and everything. And it's going to be the longest description ever on YouTube. So it's either going to be a record or we'll get kicked out. but
They do have a maximum character limit. I should know because I've been there.
Oh. Okay. Good to know. And then we're safe.
It will chop you off after a while.
I can shorten it, no problem.
Not if we create many of the same. Just keep it going.
But I mean, I was going to say, you know, as podcast hosts, didn't talk about the Church Interpreting podcast, but it was great. But as podcast hosts, we have a responsibility in that we create a space that didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, helping people tell the stories that you wouldn't otherwise hear, and then asking the question. One of the questions that I ask myself at the moment is, I've got all these resources. How do I get something of that into people's hands that they couldn't get access to? Mm-hmm. And like, you know, clip something for a reel, clip something for a short. But also, you know, if I went away with, what did I take from this that is going to change? So for me, even doing this podcast, I'm like, I need reminded sometimes that I'm supposed to carry some of this weight. We love impartiality so much, but no, we're weight carriers. Uh-huh. So often we're carrying weight. How do you carry that weight? But, you know, knowing that I'm a weight carrier, so that means I have to keep myself fit to carry the weight. That means I have to know when to put the weight down. There's a whole, I'm preaching in a few weeks' time, there's a whole sermon series on that, but there's a whole series of questions that I think interpreters need to ask themselves as to, how do we explain to clients the weight we carry? How do we explain the weight that we shouldn't be carrying? And then how do we go to clients, this is what we're actually doing. Yeah. It's not what you think we're doing.
Yeah. I help them realize, like, behind the door that's right behind you, there's a whole family waiting for you.
And if we can do that in a funny or a poignant way. Yeah. I've shared my trauma stories before, and I think sometimes, in fact, one of them's in multilingual church, but sometimes clients need to know that if it's traumatic for them, it's traumatic for us. We need to know how to deal with that, but in a sense, that's probably, it's good that there's a human being in the loop in those traumatic moments. Because there's going to be a forced thing of, we're going to have to take a breath. Yeah. Because the interpreter has to take a breath. I stopped the shift after 10 minutes once because it was so traumatic and handed over to a colleague.
That's one of the problems with remote interpretation, though. Sometimes we become anonymous. We're just a voice behind a microphone, and then we are witness to no fault of our own. We're witnessing something that we did not expect or was not told beforehand for an assignment, and then we just have to do it. And I think that's one of the problems with remote interpretation, actually, I feel. Sometimes we are put in a situation where we did not expect and not ask, and then suddenly we're like, well, I can't take a break because we're remote, and we just so that's one of the issues, actually.
Booth mate communication is so important. So when I have a remote booth mate, I'll make sure we have an open WhatsApp chat. And there have been occasions, so like some assignments, my colleagues and I have gone to 15-minute shifts because of the weight of the assignment, because of what's going on, or just because it's super technical. But also to be able to say, like, there have been a couple of times where I've said to people, do you need a break? Just because I've known, yeah, okay, you know, if there's a sermon on, you know, in church it could be like, you know, there's a sermon on how do you recover from a family where pornography, where pornography addiction is an issue, then it's going to be hard to keep going.
Yeah. Is it a ghost?
No.
At a dark creek.
No, it's a 4-year-old.
Okay. That was going to be my second guess.
It's a 4-year-old who, when he was 2, kind of crawled in when I was interpreting.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think, sometimes you have to swap, and having an open communication channel, and also, like, I don't know why, out of nowhere, my colleagues and I have started this thing of, after remote interpreting, having a very quick just chat after it on WhatsApp. Usually
Yeah.
it's a nice assignment and you can just send a joke. That's
Yeah.
fine. But sometimes, like, because I've been through vicarious trauma twice, because I've been through counselling, if it's a particularly traumatic thing, I'm going to check on someone that they're okay. And I'm going to say, do you know where to get help if you need it?
Mhm.
Like, it's a question for interpreters. The next time you get vicarious trauma, do you know what to do? Do you know how to handle this?
Mhm.
Because there's a good way of dealing with it and there are lots of bad ways. There was a Troublesome Terps episode that changed my career where we interviewed a lady who trains mental health nurses. And she's really passionate about interpreter mental health because she's seen interpreters doing mental health assignments and getting no help. Justine Mason is brilliant and she will just say it. And so the Justine Mason episode, she's like, unless you look after yourselves, you're not going to have a profession left.
Yeah.
I was doing an interpretation for judges, and one time there's an experienced judge that was talking to a panel of judges, and she was talking about how to deal with difficult things judge will have to say, and she said right after, when you go back to your office, play Tetris. And she said there's something about Tetris, just putting little blocks on top of each other, that the focus, you're just focusing on something like Tetris, and suddenly your mind will sort of forget some of the traumatic things you just saw.
I learned a lot about, so the most recent time I got vicarious trauma, I was interpreting at a meeting for leaders of a certain Christian denomination. And it was a migration policy meeting. So what are we as a group of churches going to do about migration? How do we get resources in the right place? How do we make, and a lot of it was just drafting a policy document. Fine. But to draft the policy document, they had to hear people's stories of how migration was affecting them. And there was one really difficult story of a guy who woke up. He lived on the border of 2 countries. His church was on the border. He woke up one day, looked out of his house window, and there were 10,000 migrants waiting to come in because of a war next door. But the one that caught me was, it was a leader from Central Africa who just did a 10-minute speech, and it was on stage interpreting, so we were doing about a sentence at a time, on how successive epidemics, famines, and wars had affected him and his family. And not just him, but him as a senior church leader, where everyone's expecting him to be okay because they need him to comfort them. And I'm interpreting this in front of a room full of senior church leaders, interpreting this guy's story. And he sits down, and I'm due to do another 10 minutes. And I say to my colleague, who I knew really well, still work with her sometimes, I say, can you take over? She's like, you got 10 minutes to go. I said, can you take over? She's like, sure, fine. She looked at my face and went, fine. I managed to interpret for the rest of the day, but I could tell that I wasn't fully in the room. Then I get back to the hotel room that night. I sat on the bed and I just stared at the wall. And thankfully, I was able to chat with Justine Mason and my wife, and I realised that you have to accept sometimes, like, the initial numbness. And I learned through 25 sessions of counselling, years later, that there's a gift of processing what you've been through. You don't enjoy the processing, but sometimes ignoring and sometimes doing something else is great, but sometimes you need a space that you can go to that says, I just heard this. It triggered me. How do I deal with that? And learning the skill of how do you process failure? How do you process emotion? How do you process trauma? I say to my kids that actually sometimes you have to go through the thing that you didn't want to go through, because that's going to teach you the coping skills. And if as interpreters, I've got some really trusted colleagues whose skill is, well, I just detach myself. Well, one of the things we know is that you can only detach yourself for so long. People are going to hear you're detached. And there's a thing about trauma that if you bury it, it's going to come out somewhere. And it's going to do things like, you get weird childhood traumas that change how you react to people. You get adulthood traumas that mean that you overreact to certain things. There's a saying that if your reaction is bigger than the trigger, it's not the thing that triggered you. It's something else. And so learning to go, right, I've had this trauma. I'm going to sit with the initial numbness. I'm going to allow myself to go through the numbness. I'm going to allow myself to feel, and then I'm going to decide what I need to do with it. And for me, it was just, go through the trauma, chat with people, say, this is really hard. I had a hard day, stayed at the wall for an hour or two, go to sleep. The next morning, I was pretty much okay. It was a light trauma, I guess they would call it. And that's all right. There was another time I got vicarious trauma, and the right thing for me to do was to cry over dinner because I had interpreted about a group of people whose only economic activity was selling their wives and children into prostitution. You interpret those stories, and if that hasn't affected you, and the right thing for me, I would just in floods of tears afterwards. But I needed to cry that. I needed to get through that, come out the other end and do it.
Yes.
And as men especially, and I'm talking to any guys listening to this, as men especially, very few of us are taught to process emotions properly. And the first step to processing emotions is letting yourself actually feel the emotion. And then we can, and it's like, as interpreters, we are often taught, stand back, be professional, be impartial. What if sometimes, I'm not saying always, but what if sometimes the ethical correct thing to do is not to step back, but to step forwards, not to detach, but to feel. And in doing so,
but that's natural when you're feeling like when you're interpreting and someone has a passionate speech and you enter someone's skin, and then you become that person in a certain way in another language. For me at least, that whole process, it would be actually much harder to pull back and to just sound robotic and neutral. I think, and it's all about performance, because whoever's listening to us wants to understand the feeling most of all. So at least in my case, I'm not saying that I hype it to 20. If they're at 20, maybe I'll be at I don't know, 15. But at least conveying that feeling and not being robotic is part of what we do. No, so it's actually pretty hard for me to even imagine that I would not actually try to be in the person's shoes, and automatically you feel what other people feel.
Yes.
So, and it's, of course, there's the process after. Maybe you're a bit shocked afterwards. Maybe you need to, crack a bottle of wine or do what I do, watch pro wrestling. But
that's just called trying to get clients to pay invoices.
No, but what I'm saying is that there's the afterwards of what you do in order to go through some of the emotions you went through.
So this is where I noticed. I've been interpreting professionally for over 17 years now, and I can tell very quickly. I mean, I know I look like 20. Don't worry. I've been interpreting professionally for right? Yeah, I'm 41. I've been interpreting for 17 years. And I can tell a lot about where someone trained, how someone trained, who trained them. Because some of my colleagues, especially a lot who've been around the institutional world or who were trained, pre-2000s, it's common to hear things like talk about professional detachment, neutrality, objectivity. Especially, but when you get to interpreters who are more in the commercial world, there's a brilliant Canadian interpreter called Mike LeMay.
And he was a guest on our podcast.
Yeah, Mike is just brilliant because Mike is just Mike. And there is something about that kind of interpreter where, I mean, Mike came in from the side as well, but about that kind of interpreter who's used to the commercial world, who's used to the artsy speakers or the over-the-top speakers, no one has to say to them, it's important to feel what the speaker's feeling. Because they're like, yeah, I do it all the time, it's fine. there's an it's
But
that's the deal.
That's his market. I mean, that's as far as I know. I mean, I've worked with him only a few times, and he's naturally like that. And it would be counterintuitive or outside of his nature if you had to pull him away. And I don't think his performance would be that good if he actually had to not be himself, because he has this flamboyant personality.
And that's what you do. So like I tell people I used to build interpreting teams. I don't really do that anymore because I found I wasn't suited to it. But if I got an assignment and that was super technical, I had interpreters who I would call right away. I wouldn't call them for a really artsy sales meeting or a really flamboyant speaker, because some interpreters have no natural flamboyance. But the technical stuff, they just, like one of my...
You're so polite.
But that's not who they are. Like, if you put them in a technical meeting, I remember 2 interpreters almost made me cry when they were interpreting a speech on demolition. And I'm like, it's a speech on demolition.
It depends
like,
what was being demolished.
Yeah. But they delivered it with such beauty and grace and flair, and it was brilliantly done. So my professional association, the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, gives out prizes every 2 years, at least I think every year now, for best performance on an interpreting assignment. And I was like, I'm nominating you. They got like a commendation from the people. I'm like, I've never heard interpreting of that quality in such a technical speech. There was a bit of emotion in the speech, but I'd never heard interpreting at that level where they'd taken a technical speech with some emotion in it and they had delivered it brilliantly. And I was like, I don't know how you did that, but if I could bottle what you did, I could double my fees. It is when you hear, everyone knows when you hear a colleague and you take your headphones off and you go, right, I quit. Because they're just so good.
Yeah.
I don't know what you did. I don't know how you did it, but just have my headphones. But that's just, but it is this thing of you have to know your market. And I tell people I love the flamboyant stuff. I can do the technical stuff. I can do the European Works Councils. It's just not my natural place. Put me in a church, give me an artsy speaker, give me something public facing or kind of with a bit where you have to have a bit of flair. I'm all good.
But there's the quality of the speaker. Do you understand the topic? And then there's your performance. So if you don't understand what is being said, you can maybe try to fake it if you understand the topic. But if you don't understand the topic and you understand the speaker, then you're screwed.
God bless whoever's editing this. but have you ever had? I had 1 or 2 speakers in my career where I wasn't convinced they actually knew what they were saying.
It happens all the time.
And I say to people, when I was starting out, every interpreter's got fears. When I was starting out, I was really scared of a speech with a really technical topic. I was really scared of fast speakers. And I was really scared of whenever there was a bit on the agenda that said report. As a new interpreter, that always scared me a bit. Whereas now what scares me, a speech on the agenda that has 4 nouns back to back, or 7 occurrences of the French word de in the same sentence. A speaker who says the immortal words, I'd like to begin with a joke.
Oh, yes.
What was the other one? The other one that scares me is whenever a client says on the brief, it's okay, you don't need to worry, it's going to be straightforward. Mm. I know then just to put the paracetamol on my desk.
How about hello, interpreters, don't worry, I will not try to speak fast.
Or the other one I once did. So I once did a job that was arranged by the UN. And there was a mix of in-person and remote speakers, which was totally fine. I mean, most of the speakers were marvelous. And it was a pleasure to do. And if you're that client, by the way, I love you. Please send me more work. But one of the speakers had decided that the best way to deliver his plenary to this UN thing, UN arranged thing, I should say, was to use his Apple AirPods as his microphone.
If that's one thing I fear, that is it.
He looked he looked a bit like a cyborg, but he sounded like a Dalek. Like if you ever seen like Doctor Who with the Daleks exterminate, he sounded like that, and I'm like, dude, no. He's like and talking to all these people from all around the world. So I don't have AirPods. At one point, I'm going to make myself a fake pair of AirPods, and I'm going to do that sketch that we're all waiting for, which is the difference between what you look like and what you sound like. Because, I mean, the only thing that could have been worse is if he'd used the built-in microphone of his laptop, which every remote interpreter has had that person who says, oh, the other thing that scares me as an interpreter is when the president or chair of the session says, does anyone have any questions? It's not too bad until someone says, well, it's really more of a comment than a question. And then, as an interpreter, then what I do is I tell you how to cope when someone says more of a comment than a question. I make sure I've got a bit of lag. I go on what's happened. I say to my booth mate, do you want to do a handover?
You can finish this one off.
The art of interpreting is knowing, I'm sure I'm not the only interpreter to see like finance talks on the agenda and go, I think I may be having a toilet break when that one's. I have a booth mate here in Edinburgh who enjoys finance talks. And so we just arrange the agenda so they land on her shift. And I sit going, I'm going to be playing on my phone for the entire. But if you're an interpreter and you love finance talks, I want to work with you.
I do,
but
actually.
Bear in mind, I can feed you some numbers, but I'll probably be eating pastry during most of the talk and staring into space.
I love finance stuff. I mean, it's all about the economy. I learn a lot, like the stocks and all of that. And I don't want to say I'm getting inside information about anything, but I know why my investments are either up or down. And that is super important. I learn a lot.
I got an accountant.
The economy is everywhere. It's like water. It infiltrates everything.
He's just volunteered for all the. So if you're an economics client, you know who to go for. But it's when I got an accountant. So whenever I have to do an accounting speech, the word environ becomes my favorite word because I use it so often. But I had this one accountant once when I had to do the finance speech. And he's the only accountant I've ever come across who quoted the figures to the nearest euro cent. And I'm like, who does that? And I'm like, numbers are... So my thing about numbers is I can do numbers, but I once doing a France-Scotland rugby under 21 match. And it was 69-13 to France with 5 minutes to go. And Canadians might not get this joke, but interpreters from France will get it. I'd been allowed to stay inside because it was cold, rainy and wet. And I said, I need to keep my voice warmed up. So I got to stay in the analysis suite with all the analysts. And it's 69-13 to France with 5 minutes to go. And I say to one of the analysts, I really hope France don't score again. And they said, are you worried about the kind of Scottish team's mindset and that will be humiliating? I said, no, it's just French numbers over 69 are really hard to say quickly.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for coming in this episode that was twice as long as usual. But that's great. Maybe I'll make part 1 and part 2. I don't know, but we'll see. But it was super entertaining. Thank you so much. Everyone, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, and also make some shorts and laugh. And make sure that you put yourself out there. You're not in the back. You're at the forefront to make sure that people understand the difference between a machine translation and what we do. All right. On that note, thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see each other next time.